squirrel hunter in Brent, Alabama's Talladega National Forest made a horrifying discovery on November 9, 2015. At approximately 9 a.m., the mutilated and nude body of a woman was tied to a tree. When law enforcement officers got to the scene, they immediately got to work on the investigation. As soon as they started to doubt the victim's identity, Tuscaloosa County sent them a missing persons report for 29-year-old Samantha Payne, who turned out to be the victim. Investigators were soon led in a more unsettling direction by new evidence. Although initially it seemed as though Samantha was a part of a horrific ritual sacrifice. Was she really a ritual victim after all? Or was there a darker tale involving the cunning murderer hiding in plain sight? Today's case takes us to Tuscaloosa County in western Alabama, a significant hub for the state's business, education, and industrial sectors. With 227,000 residents, it is the fifth most populous county in Alabama. Tuscaloosa County is renowned for its picturesque landscape and designated wilderness areas. It is bordered by the Appalachian Mountains and the southern Gulf coastal plain. Additionally, the University of Alabama, a prestigious school and a significant employer in the area, is located there. Tuscaloosa County has a fair share of crime, just like the majority of other counties of similar size. However, as of 2023, the crime rate has significantly decreased due to law enforcement efforts. But in the fall of 2015, a pretty graphic murder that shocked the locals in Tuscaloosa County made headlines. On Monday, November 9, 2015, at 9:00 a.m., Jeffrey Ellion, a squirrel hunter, was traveling through the Talladega National Forest south of Tuscaloosa County. He came upon a horrifying scene as he got closer to a thicket of trees close to South Sandy Road. A woman's naked, disfigured, and headless body was bound with barbed wire to a tree. She lay with her head about 14 feet away from the tree. After a distraught Jeffrey called the Tuscaloosa County Sheriff's Office in a panic, deputies showed up on the scene shortly after. Investigators were taken aback by how violent the crime was. The woman's body was so severely decomposed and looked to have been severely beaten that the authorities realized it would be challenging to identify the victim. The body was brought to the Tuscaloosa County Medical Examiner's office along with the severed head. In an attempt to explain the grisly incident, investigators searched the area. Investigators ruled out the idea that the scene was a cult sacrifice ritual because there were no altars or other markers to indicate the location. The crime scene was searched, but no clues were found. There were no obvious drag marks or tire impressions. Neither identification papers nor personal items were found in the vicinity of the body. Due to a dearth of evidence, investigators had to entertain a different theory. The victim had been attacked elsewhere and then brought to the forest to be executed. The complete absence of forensic evidence baffled investigators, but two unexpected leads surfaced back at the sheriff's office. Despite no evidence being found at the crime scene, investigators learned of a missing persons report for Samantha Payne, a 29-year-old local woman. That same day, Suzanne Payne, her mother, stated that she had not seen her daughter since Friday, October 30th, 2015. Although Samantha's photo could not be matched to the decomposed remains from the crime scene, there was a good chance that the victim was the missing woman. If the coroner's report could confirm that Samantha Payne was their victim, then the police would have to rely on it. Dr. Stephen Dutton conducted the victim's autopsy. He found it difficult to pinpoint the victim's identity and the precise cause of death. This was caused by the victim's severe injuries and mistreatment in addition to the decomposed state of the remains. This included for broken ribs and multiple lacerations on the skin caused by a sharp object. Her teeth had been extracted, along with her finger and toenails. The most perplexing finding, though, was the absence of her internal organs. Dutton was unable to establish whether the victim's organs were harvested by a murderer or scavenged by untamed animals, but it was clear that this was a homicide based on the manner the body had been tied to a tree and dismembered. DNA was taken from the body by the coroner and sent to be tested on Samantha's relatives. A sheriff's deputy from nearby Hale County called in to report an intriguing piece of information while Tuscaloosa County investigators awaited a positive identification. Concerned neighbors close to the Talladega National Forest had reported an odd car that had been abandoned along South Sandy Road approximately 10 days prior. The deputy discovered a couple strolling by the side of the road and stopped to talk with them after going to look into the matter. The deputy reported to the police that the two individuals had given their names as Stephen George, 27, and Chili Bruce, 18. The deputy saw that their clothes were stained with blood, despite their claims that they had run out of gas and had to leave their car and walk home. After searching the two, he discovered that they were carrying crystal. The deputy informed the investigators that Chali and Stephen had been taken into custody at the Hale County Jail on charges of drug possession. Stephen and Chili were visited by detectives from the Tuscaloosa County Sheriff's Office at the Hale County Jail early on November 10, 2010. They both acknowledged that Samantha Payne was a friend of theirs when asked if they knew her. When investigators questioned Stephen and Chili about any information they had regarding the remains found in the forest, they unexpectedly confessed that the body found there was Samantha's. Furthermore, they acknowledged their involvement in the events that preceded her demise. They insisted, though, that they had nothing to do with her death. Rather, they accused Michael David Belcher, a 31-year-old friend of theirs. Investigators were told by Chili that Michael and Samantha were friends after their previous relationship ended. After Samantha threatened to report Michael to the police for stealing her car, Michael made the decision to kill her on Sunday, November 1, 2015. In addition, Chili gave investigators important information when she revealed that Michael was the rightful owner of the car she and Stephen had abandoned close to Talladega National Forest. She said that there was evidence in the car linking him to the murder. Investigators had a starting point with Chili's statement, but her cryptic answer suggested there was more to the story than what she had revealed. Stephen and Chili were taken to the Tuscaloosa Sheriff's County Jail by investigators, where they were charged with capital murder and detained without bond while awaiting additional questioning. The Tuscaloosa County Sheriff's Office also received Michael's car, which had been impounded in Hale County. Investigators discovered that their suspects were telling the truth after entering the vehicle registration number through the system. It is true that Michael Belcher owned the car. The investigators got ready for a challenging assignment as well. They had to break the news to Samantha's family that their lovely daughter had died horribly. On October 30, 1986, Samantha Christine Payne was born in Dallas County, Alabama. She was raised in a loving family consisting of her sister Katrina, two brothers, Stephen and Jonathan Payne, and her parents Roy and Suzanne Payne. Samantha's family said she was understanding and forgiving. She had put a lot of effort into her part-time jobs to pay for her college education. She had a reputation for cherishing her friends and giving thoughtful gifts. But Samantha had joined the wrong crowd in her mid-20s and began dabbling with crystal. Samantha's parents had made a concerted effort to assist her in breaking the habit, but she was unable to separate herself from her questionable new group of friends. The distraught parents were questioned by investigators regarding the last day they had seen her alive. Samantha's mother, Suzanne, stated that on October 30, 2015, she had gone to a Halloween party. On that day, Samantha turned 29. She wanted to dress like Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, but she was afraid her friends would make fun of her. Since it was her birthday, Suzanne had consoled her daughter and told her to go enjoy herself. Samantha's parents never thought it would be the last time they would see their daughter as a beaming Samantha left the house. A warrant was issued for Michael Belcher's arrest based on the information that Chili and Stephen provided. Michael was brought in for questioning at the Tuscaloosa County Sheriff's Office on November 11, 2015, but he was uncooperative right away. Even though he denied knowing Samantha's whereabouts and steadfastly refused to acknowledge his role in the murder, the investigators' investigation was not yet at a standstill. Given that Stephen and Chili had already admitted to seeing Michael kill Samantha, investigators attempted a different approach. They made a plea agreement with Stephen and Chili, offering them a lighter sentence in court in exchange for their testimony against Michael. They both nodded, and the harrowing account of what transpired before Samantha's murder started. Stephen and Chili claimed that they had continued their drug-fueled party with Michael and Samantha on Halloween night well into the next day, well past midnight. Two additional friends, Alyssa Watson, 22, and Marcus George, 34, joined them. All six of them were smoking meth on the evening of November 1, 2015, at Michael's father's motorcycle repair shop. Michael was regarded as their ringleader by the group who frequently congregated at the store. Stephen proposed to the group that they take Samantha's car when she went to use the restroom. After removing the keys from Samantha's purse, Stephen and the other 3 men drove off with the vehicle. Samantha did not seem to care about the men's absence when she got back, and she did not even realize her car was missing. The men eventually made their way back and resumed smoking meth. Stephen revealed to Chili and Alyssa that they had taken Samantha's car's battery and catalytic converter before setting it on fire. Samantha did not realize her car was gone until much later, right before they were going to leave. She asked her friend about it, but everyone laughed at her car. Samantha finally threatened to call the police on them as she grew angrier and more impatient. According to Chili, this was the point at which everything began to go wrong. Michael was aware that they would not be able to get Samantha's burned car back, and that if Samantha reported the incident to the police, they would face charges for both meth possession and vehicle theft. Michael then seized Samantha and threw her to the ground. After he repeatedly punched and kicked her until her face was covered in blood, the group loaded her into Michael's car trunk and drove around for hours while Samantha sobbed. However, her night of agony was far from over. After some time, the group reached Michael's residence. Michael gave Samantha the order to undress before they entered. Samantha's humiliation at having to enter the house nude in front of her friends was intolerable. Samantha's feet and wrists were restrained inside the home with a belt, shoelaces, and cable. Again, for hours on end, she was beaten by the group. Samantha's survival was not an option, in Chili's own words. Once more, they placed Samantha in Michael's vehicle's trunk and proceeded to the Talladega National Forest, the site of the ultimate act of this horrifying brutality. While being driven, Samantha had hurt herself trying to get out of the trunk, but the 5 suspects forced her back in and struck her with sticks until she stopped talking. When they arrived at the forest, they pulled her over to the tree. With the last of her strength, Samantha tried to scratch Michael's face to get away, but they caught her, hit her again, and used barbed wire to tie her to the tree. Samantha had begged them to stop during this terrible ordeal, Chili recalled, and she had promised to forgive them and never tell anyone if they let her go. However, her cruel captors disregarded her cries. Samantha had scratched Michael, so Alyssa and Chili made the decision to use a knife to remove her fingernails and toenails in order to destroy any DNA evidence that might have been gathered under her nails. The woman even took it a step further and used pliers to extract a few of her teeth. Samantha kept telling them she loved and forgives them throughout the entire scenario. After that, the group watched as Michael began to cut Samantha in various places on her body. Samantha eventually ran out of strength after being tortured for hours. At that moment, Michael stabbed Samantha in the neck, severing her throat. The graphic details that Chili and Stephen had provided, as well as the hours of suffering Samantha had gone through, unsettled the investigators. Investigators executed search warrants for Michael's vehicle and residence in an effort to bring her justice. They discovered an automobile battery in Michael's home, exactly as Chili and Stephen had said. They discovered blood-stained women's clothing in Michael's car. DNA testing using samples from Samantha's parents revealed that Samantha's body was the one discovered in the forest. Samantha's blood was also consistent with the blood on Chili and Stephen's clothing, as well as the women's clothes from Michael's car. Alyssa and Marcus, the other 2 suspects, were also taken into custody on November 13, 2015. Their statements were consistent with those given by Chili and Stephen. Marcus and Alyssa were placed under bond for $60,000 after being accused of first-degree kidnapping. As Stephen had informed investigators, Samantha's burned-out car was discovered beneath the Harrisburg Bridge in Bibb County, Alabama, equipped with the tangible proof and the admissions from all 4 suspects in Samantha's homicide. Detectives questioned Michael once more. He persisted in denying any involvement, but it soon became evident that there was sufficient evidence for the authorities to imprison him for murder. Then, when Michael allegedly called his mother to ask for advice, she reportedly advised him to be truthful. While he was incarcerated, Michael asked her to take care of his cat. Following his arrest, Michael was accused of capital murder. He was remanded without bond in detention. investigators and prosecutors were forced to rely on the eyewitness accounts of the 4 other suspects prior to the case going to trial. Stephen and Chili had already consented to testify against Michael as important eyewitnesses and enter a guilty plea in exchange for a shorter sentence. If given the same plea agreement as Stephen, Michael consented to enter a guilty plea to the murderer. However, the prosecution flatly rejected his request. They desired the harshest penalty Alabama could offer him. Alyssa and Marcus declined the plea offers made by the prosecution, insisting instead on maintaining their innocence. Both were released from jail after paying their bonds. Judge Jim Quinn determined on December 22, 2015, that there was sufficient evidence to hold Michael Belcher, Chili Bruce, and Stephen George in custody while their cases were presented to a grand jury. The judge declared that a grand jury would hear the cases of Marcus George and Alyssa Watson during the same hearing. 18-year-old Chili Bruce entered a guilty plea to the charge of murder on January 15, 2016. She was given a 20-year prison sentence, but as a condition of the plea agreement, she would be eligible for parole in 5 years. She was also mandated to take part in the drug rehabilitation program at the Alabama Therapeutic Education Facility. Alyssa Watson and Marcus George were the first 2 to go on trial in November 2018. After rejecting the prosecution's plea deals, they both pleaded not guilty and claimed to have left the forest before Samantha's murder, but their gamble failed. Alyssa and Marcus had been involved in the entire situation, according to Chili's testimony. As proof that Alyssa and Marcus had been at the murder scene, the prosecution presented cell phone location data. Alyssa and Marcus were found guilty by the jury of first-degree kidnapping and felony murder. They were all given 30-year prison terms on December 17, 2018 for each of the charges. Later, the Alabama Court of Appeals maintained the 30-year sentence for murder, but overturned the first-degree kidnapping conviction. Alyssa was about to give birth to a boy, and Marcus was a young father whose family needed him, so their families begged for forgiveness. While Marcus apologized to Samantha's family and expressed regret for his poor decisions, Alyssa chose not to speak during the trial. But in her address to the jury, Samantha's mother, Suzanne Payne, called Alyssa and Marcus 2 of the most callous and evil non-human creatures that had ever walked the earth, and expressed her hope that they would always be haunted by Samantha's voice, pleading for mercy. Currently serving their sentences, Alyssa and Marcus are expected to be freed in 2048. With great anticipation, the trials for Michael Belcher, Stephen George, and Chili Bruce started in March 2019. Weeks after her arrest, Chili entered a guilty plea, and the jury upheld her 20-year sentence with 5 years of parole eligibility. A few days into the trial, Stephen, like Chili, entered a plea agreement and admitted to killing Samantha. He described in detail how Michael killed Samantha, and his indignant corroborated Chili's. Nonetheless, the jury concluded that he had been heavily involved in Samantha's demise. It was Stephen who proposed car theft and initiated the entire criminal activity. Therefore, the jury found Stephen guilty and gave him a life sentence in prison, even though they had promised him a reduced sentence. Thanks to the plea agreement, he barely avoided the death penalty. Michael Belcher was next in line. The prosecution made their case and portrayed Michael as the gang's ringleader. The prosecution claimed that Michael had already planned to kill Samantha after the 3 men stole her car based on the testimony of Chili and Stephen. His drug-induced rage had driven him to kill the young woman so violently out of fear of being discovered. Michael was given a death by lethal injection sentence on April 3, 2019 by Judge Brad Almond following the jury's recommendation. At the sentencing hearing, Michael expressed his sincere apologies for Samantha's ordeal, saying that words could never fully capture his sorrow and grief. But Suzanne, Samantha's mother, did not think Michael could really feel regret for what he had done. At the age of 26, Chili will be released on probation in late 2023. Michael is incarcerated at home in prison on death row, and Stephen is still there for life. The sorrow of Samantha's passing will always be with her family. After Michael Belcher's trial and sentencing, Suzanne Payne talked to the media about her life without Samantha. She cried as she recalled how unique her daughter was. She was always able to find the good in everything and was quick to smile. It has been said by Samantha's parents that losing their daughter was like having no sun in the summer and no cold in the winter. Since that was also the last time they ever saw their daughter alive, they still mourn her loss every Halloween when it is her birthday. To ensure that Samantha's legacy endures, Suzanne has devoted her life to sharing her story. The risks of putting our trust in individuals who might not be acting in our best interests are brought to light by our case today. Samantha was the kind of person who did not see the negative aspects of people, which made her an easy target, according to what friends and family have said about her. Ultimately, her assassins used her innocence and good nature as leverage to take her life. On the evening of December 23, 1998, a distress call was made to 911 in San Diego, prompting firefighters to rush to La Jolla Scenic Drive. The scene they encountered was nothing short of shocking. A car completely consumed by flames. As the smoke dissipated, a horrifying sight came into view: the charred remains of an individual in the passenger seat. The vehicle, which had Kansas license plates, was registered to a man named David Stevens, a 38-year-old resident of Pacific Beach, San Diego. This grim discovery marked the commencement of a perplexing case. The question arises: who exactly was David Stevens, and what events led to this tragic occurrence along one of San Diego's most picturesque routes? San Diego, California, renowned for its breathtaking beaches, parks, and year-round Mediterranean climate, is also notable for its strong ties to the United States Navy, as well as its prominence in the fields of healthcare and biotechnology. With a population exceeding 1.3 million residents, it stands as the 8th most populous city in the United States and the 2nd most populous in California. San Diego's rich history dating back to its establishment in 1769 and its diverse population contribute to a distinctive way of life that harmonizes recreational opportunities with a profound appreciation for its past. However, like any major city, San Diego faces its share of challenges, including crime. It is within this context that the cold case of David Allen Stevens, which had remained unsolved for years, was finally resolved in 2023. David Allen Stevens, born on October 23, 1960, in Osmond, Pierce County, Nebraska, led a life that remains somewhat shrouded in mystery, even after his untimely demise. While information about his father, Gerald Lloyd Stevens, is available, details regarding his mother and early years are scarce. Nevertheless, what is known paints a portrait of a man who held a significant position in the corporate world. He served as a marketing manager at Perfect Match, a dating service, a role that likely granted him unique insights into the intricacies of personal relationships. The irony of this is not lost, considering the enigmatic circumstances surrounding his own personal life and tragic end. On December 23, 1998, in San Diego, a sudden explosion disrupted the tranquility of an otherwise ordinary day. The loud boom, reminiscent of a gas explosion, prompted an immediate response from the San Diego Fire Department. Racing to La Jolla's Scenic Drive, firefighters were met with a vehicle engulfed in flames. As they battled the blaze, a journalist captured the intense scene, documenting the extinguishing of the fire. However, as the smoke cleared, a chilling discovery emerged. The charred remains of a human body were visible in the passenger seat, marking the beginning of a complex investigation. Further investigation revealed that the car's license plates were registered in Kansas and belonged to a 38-year-old man named David Stevens, who resided in Pacific Beach, San Diego. The mystery deepened as homicide detectives turned their attention to Stevens' apartment, searching for any clues that could shed light on the events leading up to his death. Inside the apartment, they stumbled upon intriguing signs that suggested he was not alone on his final night. In the bedroom's wastebasket, detectives found a discarded contraceptive wrapper and a tube of KOY jelly, indicating the presence of sexual activity. Additionally, 2 glasses on the nightstand, one bearing lipstick marks, hinted at the company of a woman. Strands of long, straight black hair, likely belonging to a female, were discovered in the bathroom. The bedroom itself provided even more intriguing clues. Investigator Joseph Cristenziani, one of the homicide investigators from the San Diego Police Department, observed 2 sets of fingerprints on the mirrored headboard of Stevens' bed. The size difference between the two sets suggested the involvement of both a man and a woman. The positioning and number of fingerprints indicated that an intimate encounter had recently taken place in the apartment. Armed with these discoveries, detectives began to reconstruct the events of that fateful night. Their focus shifted towards collecting physical evidence, particularly the smaller set of fingerprints and the black hairs, as they pointed towards the involvement of a woman. This crucial piece of evidence indicated that the woman may have been in the company of Stevens shortly before his unfortunate demise. As the investigation into the death of David Allen Stevens progressed, the police focused their efforts on identifying the mysterious woman who could be connected to his final moments. Their search led them to a nearby establishment called Dancers, a topless bar that Stevens was known to frequent. Detective John Teff, one of the investigators from the San Diego Police Department assigned to the case, visited the club and shared Stevens' pictures with the dancers and staff. Regrettably, none of the fingerprints obtained from the dancers matched those found in his bedroom, leaving the police without any solid leads regarding the woman's identity. In an attempt to uncover new information, Detective John R. Young, another dedicated detective from the San Diego Police Department, decided to explore a different approach. He delved into Stevens' personal belongings, specifically his address book. During Young's interview with her, the woman described her relationship with Stevens as casually friendly, hoping that this new lead would yield results. Her fingerprints were compared to those found in the apartment. Once again, there was no match. For months had passed since Stevens was tragically discovered in his car, and with no new leads or matches, the case gradually grew cold. For over 2 years, the mysterious death of David Allen Stevens remained dormant in the cold case files, with no significant breakthroughs or promising leads. Then, in a stroke of strategic thinking, the San Diego homicide detectives decided to capitalize on a major event, Super Bowl 35, which took place on January 28, 2001, featuring the Baltimore Ravens and the New York Giants. With a large television audience anticipated, the detectives saw an opportunity and ran a Crime Stoppers spot during the game, displaying David Stevens' picture and appealing for public assistance. The following day marked a pivotal moment in the investigation. An anonymous female called in with potentially crucial information. The caller directed detectives towards a suspect, the same dancer who had previously asserted that she and David Stevens were merely friends. Despite the fact that her DNA and fingerprints did not match the evidence at the crime scene, detectives could not disregard this new lead. They believed it was more than a mere coincidence. Over the next 6 months, detectives tirelessly pursued the angle of the dance club, hoping to uncover solid evidence. Despite their diligent efforts, they continuously came up empty-handed, unable to definitively connect anyone to the crime. However, in November of 2001, the homicide team received another significant call. The caller was Nye Noren, a 21-year-old woman who claimed to possess vital information regarding David Stevens' murder. Noren disclosed that Stevens had been her supervisor and lover at Perfect Match. She held a crucial piece of information, the name of the man responsible for Stevens' death, Ronald Barker, who was 35 years old at the time of the murder. This revelation injected new life into the case, providing detectives with a solid lead to pursue. With this newfound information, the investigation gained momentum as detectives sought to unravel the connection between Nye Noren, Ronald Barker, and the tragic fate of David Allen Stevens. Ronald Barker, born in 1963, and Nye Noren, born in 1980, emerged as the central figures in the tragic case of David Allen Stevens. Barker's early life and family background remained largely unknown, concealed in the shadows of his later actions. On the other hand, Noren's life was marked by hardship from the very beginning. Born in a Thai refugee camp after her mother escaped the horrors in Cambodia, she arrived in the United States at the age of 5, initially settling in Florida before moving to San Diego. There, Noren's life was further tainted by domestic turmoil, as her stepfather's abusive behavior created a tense home environment. Noren worked as a telemarketer at Perfect Match, where she crossed paths with David Stevens. It was at that location where she also encountered Barker, whom she found through an online platform and entered into a passionate relationship with. Despite him being a married 35-year-old man and her being only 18, While Norrin's relationship with Stevens progressed from casual workplace flirting to planning their first date, her affair with Barker continued in the background. However, Norrin became increasingly dissatisfied with Barker. On the same night that Stevens was killed, Norrin had previously left his apartment at 3:00 a.m. when she returned home. She found Barker waiting for her in a jealous rage. In an attempt to conceal her infidelity, she falsely told Barker that her encounter with Stevens was non-consensual. Later, Norrin confessed to the police that Barker, consumed by jealousy, shot and killed Stevens before setting his car on fire. She claimed to have been present during the murder but unable to stop Barker. Norrin portrayed herself as another victim of Barker's anger, implicating him as the possessive boyfriend who carried out the murder. To support her account, Norrin agreed to a police request to call Barker and discuss the incident while the conversation was recorded. This tactic aimed to move beyond a he said, she said situation, hoping to obtain an admission or any detail that could strengthen the case. The investigation uncovered a complex and intricate plot. Barker admitted to following Stevens, pretending that Norrin's car had broken down. When Barker signaled with his lights, Norrin deceived Stevens by claiming it was her brother coming to assist. Unaware of the impending danger, Stevens allowed Barker into the back seat of his car, where Barker shot him twice in the head. Barker confessed to setting the car on fire to eliminate evidence and even displayed burns he sustained during the act. For nearly 3 years, the two kept their atrocious crime hidden, bound by their shared secrecy. However, as the case unraveled, it became evident that both Barker and Norrin were deeply entangled in a web of lies and deceit, ultimately leading to the tragic demise of David Allen Stevens. In November 2001, a significant turn of events unfolded when detectives apprehended Ronald Barker for first-degree murder. Shortly after, Norton was also arrested and faced the same charge. Barker's trial occurred in January 2003 in a San Diego courtroom, where he opted to represent himself. Despite his efforts to challenge the evidence, the jury swiftly found him guilty after just 2 hours of deliberation. Barker was sentenced to life in prison on January 27, 2003. Norrin's trial followed a similar path, resulting in her conviction for first-degree murder and a life sentence. However, Norrin's case took a different turn as she appealed her conviction based on battered woman syndrome. This appeal led to a reduced sentence of 15 years, which began in 2003. Norrin was released in 2017 after serving 14 years in prison, marking the conclusion of a complex chapter in San Diego's criminal justice system. The resolution of David Allen Stevens finally brought closure to this family, offering them a sense of finality and justice after enduring a long and challenging process. After leaving the school, an 11-year-old girl vanished from sight. This case has had numerous unexpected turns and strange facts for years, making it one of the most bizarre and mysterious in all of California. The story did not finish there, even though it took 45 years to discover the truth. We will explain what happened to Linda O'Keefe in this video, as well as the reasons why this investigation has drawn interest from millions of people worldwide. Born in Newport Beach, California, USA on May 24, 1962, Linda O'Keefe grew up in a large, close-knit family. Her mother worked as a seamstress, and her father was a machinist. Linda had 2 sisters, an older and a younger sister. Linda enjoyed drawing, playing the piano, and spending time in nature and with animals. On warm summer days, she took advantage of every opportunity to visit the beach, which was only 800 meters from her house. The girl was also a Girl Scout and went to summer school. Linda went there nearly every day in July 1973 when she was 11 years old. On July 6th, instead of her usual bicycle ride to school, she was given a ride by a piano teacher who lived a short distance away from the O'Keefe family. Linda called her mother from the school phone when classes ended, which was around 1:30 p.m. She was asking to be picked up because she did not have her bicycle with her that day. But the mother told her to walk even though it was only a little over 2 kilometers from school to home because she did not want to be distracted from her work. After speaking with her mother, Linda was not in the mood to walk. She even cried, and the school secretary considered giving her a ride home. But the woman needed to go the opposite direction, so she abandoned the idea. Linda left the school, sat outside for a while, and then headed home. Her route should have taken no more than half an hour, but the girl was clearly late. Her mother did not give it much thought at first. She assumed Linda had gone out for a walk with her friends, but as the hours went by, her concerns grew. Her mother made the decision at 6 o'clock in the evening to call all the people she knew whose kids lived close by and might have gone out with her daughter, but none of them had seen Linda that day. The family made the decision to start looking after her father got home from work. They made their way through the entire neighborhood, even the one Linda was meant to take on her way home from school. When it got dark outside and they were still unable to locate the girl, the parents decided to call the police. At that point, they believed the girl had resented her mother for not picking her up and was purposefully staying away from home. After receiving a report about a missing girl, officers started their search. Her mother stayed at home and called dozens of people who might have had a chance to see Linda, while her father and older sister ventured out in 2 cars to comb the neighborhood once more. All night long, the search went on. Using search dogs and helicopters, police combed the parks and streets, but their findings were equivocal. More police officers had been sent to join the search by morning, and local newspapers had already begun to cover the massive operation surrounding the 11-year-old girl's disappearance. 9 kilometers from Linda's house, at around 10:30 a.m., a bicyclist, her friend, and some were riding through a park. They went there in order to observe the local wildlife for the botanical circle. After dismounting, the father and the child rode toward the ditches in hopes of seeing frogs, but there was more waiting for them. The man moved closer after spotting something bright in the grass and realizing it was a human body that was half submerged in water. Upon reading in the morning paper about a girl's disappearance and the police's all-night search for her, assumed the body belonged to her right away. The man and his friends quickly exited the park, hopped in their cars, and drove to the closest payphone to report their discovery. An officer who had participated in the search for Linda was encountered by them en route. After learning their story, the policeman reported it and went in the direction of the location. It did not take long for the investigators to identify the deceased as Linda Delkeef. She was dressed in the identical clothes the girl had left for school, and her mother had made the outfit the girl was wearing. Her backpack was also lying next to her, but she did not have on any shoes and they were not discovered close to the body. After investigating the crime scene, detectives discovered tire tracks next to the body's location, but no other clues. The cause of death was determined by medical examiners to be strangulation. It was concluded that the death happened between 2 a.m. and 11 p.m. Investigators deduced that Linda had most likely been kidnapped not long after she had left school, meaning that her abductor had likely held her captive for roughly 12 hours. In addition to being abused, the victim's body had DNA traces discovered by experts. Since DNA and analysis had not yet been done in those years, they were given to the laboratory for safekeeping. After failing to find any solid leads, the investigators started searching for witnesses. Interviews were conducted with all of Linda's friends, school staff, and the people who lived on the streets where the girl was meant to walk home. It soon produced results. The girl's friends saw her on her way home from school and noticed something off. Linda was walking down the road when a turquoise van approached her, slowed down, and continued to drive alongside the girl. But her friend did not see anything else because Linda in the van vanished from her field of vision. Almost instantly, police were able to locate 2 additional witnesses. The 19-year-old girl and her mother were driving the car about 100 yards from Lynn to school when they noticed the girl speaking with the driver of the turquoise van that had stopped next to her. At approximately 1:15 p.m., the witnesses, who were familiar with the O'Keefe family from their neighborhood, were shocked to see Lynn chatting with an adult male on the street and decided to observe what was happening. Linda was standing directly in front of the van with its passenger door open. The girl entered the car at some point while she was reportedly conversing with the driver. The witnesses chose not to pay much attention to the van as it drove off shortly after. Since they were positive the girl would never get into a car with a stranger, they assumed Linda had been picked up by a relative or acquaintance. Investigators were able to get a rough description of the driver after questioning the girl and her mother. He was a white man, about 24 or 30 years old, with an elongated face and blonde, curly hair. Regretfully, the women were unable to recall the car's manufacturer or even the license plate number. Nevertheless, the two women's story was the only strong lead in the case. So based on what these witnesses had to say, investigators assembled an APB on the suspect and his vehicle. They were dispersed throughout California, but to no avail. The investigator had a few more conversations with the woman in the hopes that she would remember some more information. They even accepted an offer to undergo a hypnosis session at one point. It was only partially successful. The witnesses could remember a few more details about the suspect's vehicle, but they were all too little to lead to the murderer's location. The police soon located a second witness. Around 10:30 p.m., a neighbor who lived close to the scene of Linda's death heard a woman screaming. At first, she thought she heard someone yell, "Stop hurting me," but the voice ended suddenly. The witness might have heard it because the girl passed away at the same time. Later that morning, the detectives got another intriguing tip. This one concerned Linda's body. It was in that park that the artist was working on his painting. He started to watch what was happening and realized that something serious had happened when he noticed dozens of police cars. He once saw something that seemed strange to him. There was a young man in the park, observing from the bushes next to the police. The artist chose to ask him what was going on because he was standing fairly close to him. The young man said the police had located the girl's body and he looked very concerned. Aside from that, neither the man nor the artist could see any details because they were sufficiently far from the scene of the body's discovery. How the man knew that they were looking at the body of a girl was a reasonable question for the detectives to ask. The man was characterized by the artist as a thin, white man with sideburns and blonde hair who was between the ages of 18 and 24. He stood at 180 centimeters tall. When the two witnesses described the van driver's appearance to the police, this description came pretty close. Investigators came to the conclusion that this man was the murderer as a result that he had decided to observe the police that morning. Finding the killer in the large city proved to be quite difficult, despite the police possessing a fairly detailed description of his appearance. But then something unexpected occurred 2 days later. They were approached by 18-year-old Peter Wooden, who admitted to the killing. The young man went to the same school as Cindy, the victim's elder sister, and lived close to the O'Keefe family. The town's residents were shocked when the news quickly spread throughout it. Police questioned the boy for 7 hours and searched his parents' house, not anticipating such unexpected developments. Following that, he was formally accused of murder. After 3 days, everyone was in for another shocking turn of events. Peter was declared free by the investigators after being exonerated of all charges. They claimed that the young man's confession contained far too many falsehoods and that the only times his story lined up with information that was published in the media were by coincidence. If not, he purposefully provided the investigators with false testimony that went against the actual evidence. Finally, the two witnesses who had seen Linda with the driver of the van were positive it was not Peter. Since they both lived close to the young man, the women knew him well and could recognize him right away. Consequently, the police deduced that the young man was merely attempting to make a name for himself by admitting to the crime of someone else. The man may have suffered from mental health issues, but he was unrelated to the murder. The investigators were left without a single good lead after that. They continued searching the entire town for the van and its driver, even enlisting the help of Linda's classmates. Children searched for that same turquoise van on their bikes while riding through the streets, despite police protests, but they were unable to locate it. Police interviewed 175 people during the first month of the investigation, searched every inch of the route from the school to the home, and requested assistance from the general public. They chose to make public a crude drawing of the van's driver a few weeks later, but that move also failed to produce any results. Detectives were not sure whether to pursue this at first because they thought the man would leave town, but as time went on, they needed to employ more and more resources in order to crack the case. The police had a new lead after 2 months. In the same neighborhood, there had been abuse of another girl. After dragging her into his van and taking her to a desolate location, an unidentified man released her. Despite discrepancies, investigators surmised right away that Linda's killer might have been responsible for the murder. The attacker's description of his appearance did not correspond with the information supplied by the witnesses in Linda's case, and he drove a white van. The detective soon had a lead on the suspect. The truck driver, who was 32 years old, was found to be guilty. Investigators came to the conclusion that this man had nothing to do with Linda's murder, because witnesses claimed he did not resemble the man Linda was speaking to at all. Although investigators have continued to work on the case over the years, no noteworthy evidence has turned up since then. Authorities sent DNA samples from Linda's body to a lab in 2001, 28 years after the murder, in the hopes of obtaining a profile of the killer's DNA. However, the man was not included in the FBI database. This suggested that either it happened before they began collecting DNA from offenders or the murderer had not been charged in any prior criminal cases. Experts attempted, but were unsuccessful, to locate his next of kin in that database a few years later. However, the tools available for DNA analysis were far from what they are today, making it nearly impossible to do something similar in those years. Around the middle of 2010, there was a breakthrough in the field of forensics, which gave the police new tools for locating suspects. Not to be left behind, investigators in Linda's case also turned to a private lab known as Parabon in 2018. They sent detectives a picture of a man created using Linda's murderer's DNA. DNA phenotyping is an innovative technology that enables you to identify various physical characteristics of an individual based only on a small sample of their DNA. Experts assembled two portraits at the same time, implying the perpetrator's possible ages of 20 or 60. This portrait was surprisingly accurate to the testimonies of witnesses who had 45 years earlier seen the suspect alive. Investigators in Linda's did something no one had ever done before. In most cases, they would contact people who may have known the man and published portraits of him in the media to garner public attention. Exactly 45 years after the murder, on July 6, 2018, they shared a string of messages on Twitter on behalf of the victim. The final day of Linda's life was detailed in the sequence of 68 messages. The way the investigators presented this data made it seem as though she was telling the public directly what had happened to her on July 6, 1973. The story started in the morning with Linda narrating her day at school, her anger toward her mother for not picking her up in the car, and the girls' walk home. Detectives have meticulously chosen every detail from these messages to create the most accurate picture of the day. The last tweet in the series informs followers that there has been no progress in finding her killer. In response, the police have released a picture of the offender on the girl's behalf. 45 years later, I am able to talk again, and I have to tell you something important. The killer's face, which was found through the use of his DNA, is a new lead in my case. This technology did not exist in 1973, but it can now change everything. This strategy attracted a great deal of attention to Linda's case right away, all over the world. Police had previously posted details about past unresolved cases on social media, but a victim's account was unique. The murderer's own portrait served no purpose. The investigators needed to get as much attention as they could for these photos because if someone identified the subject and informed the police, it would only aid in the case's resolution. They did a fantastic job at that. Over 7 million people saw this series of tweets in total. Detectives spent several months investigating the numerous tips and potential identities of the perpetrator that the police received, but they were never able to identify a credible suspect. They were not going to give up in the face of this, especially since Linda's case had attracted millions of attention. Once more, the investigators turned to Parabon, this time requesting that they attempt to use the killer's DNA to identify his relatives. While comparable efforts by forensic scientists have been made in the early 2000s, the required instruments were non-existent at the time. After nearly 20 years, things have changed. Investigators were able to identify the culprit thanks to the Parabon expert search for relatives of the DNA's owner. The search for Linda's murderers started in August 2018, and it took investigators nearly 6 months to find any leads. They located the killer's third cousin by using private DNA databases. That essentially meant that detectives were one step closer to cracking the case. All they needed to do was look up the man's family tree and identify a suspect, but the Parabon experts did not stop looking until they made an unexpected finding. In one of the private databases, they discovered the murderer's personal DNA. He had willingly submitted his sample to a database where they could look up long-lost or distant ancestors. Later on, it was discovered that the man had received the unique genetic kit required to access the database from a member of his family. Police finally knew the identity of the murderer, James Allen Neal, 45 years later. Detectives visited the 72-year-old man who was living in a different state in January 2019. A private database would not have the credibility the court required, so they had to obtain a sample of the suspect's DNA before they could make an arrest. Police installed surveillance on Neal's property on January 29th and made arrangements with a garbage company to receive anything the suspect threw out. Following the acquisition of multiple items from which specialists could extract the DNA sample, detectives dispatched them to the laboratory and stayed in close observation of James over the following 3 days. Sadly, forensics was unable to obtain a sample of the man's DNA, so the investigators had to look elsewhere for evidence. They soon got the chance. The police promptly gathered the evidence after observing the suspect smoking while seated in his car in the parking lot. He then threw the butt of his cigarette on the sidewalk before driving off. This time, scientists were able to take a DNA sample, and it precisely matched the murderer's DNA that was discovered on Linda's body. This implied that the culprit for whom they had been looking for nearly 50 years was James Neal. A few days later, detectives called a press conference to finally announce the suspect James Neal's arrest. James Neal was born in Chicago in 1946, and his family later relocated to California. His aggressive behavior was a result of his parents' frequent beatings, humiliations, and acts of violence against him. He started committing small-time crimes as a teenager at a young age, such as breaking into people's homes. Following that, he left school and made an effort to find employment, but he never stayed put for longer than a few months at a time. The man turned out to have a lengthy criminal past. He was arrested over a dozen times for theft, car theft, and robbery, among other offenses. Almost each time, he was released with little punishment and returned to his previous ways. James got married for the first time at the age of 25, and the two made their home in the Los Angeles suburbs. 2 years after they moved in, he killed Linda, and their house was a half-hour's drive from the city where she lived. The perpetrator was on probation for less serious crimes in another state at the time, and James' wife was expecting. Following that, he received numerous citations for theft and forging bank checks. He also briefly served time in jail for breaking the terms of his probation. James was apprehended by the authorities 3 more times for moving infractions after being released from prison. He divorced his first wife, with whom they had 2 daughters. He lived in different states for a while, but then returned to Colorado and married another woman in 1997. She had a child from her first marriage, and soon she and James had a daughter. Detectives who looked into the man's background discovered that although he may have been involved in numerous cases of child abuse, he was never prosecuted for his crimes. Neal approached 2 girls in his car and abducted them in 1995 and 2004. After mistreating them, he let them go. James remained free because he was never found guilty in either case. He was later suspected by police of at least 5 other similar incidents involving the kidnapping of girls from the street by an unidentified man in a car. A girl who attended James' church in 2010 lodged a complaint against him. She acknowledged that she had been molested for months by the man, who was 63 years old at the time. Neal admitted after all the victims reported multiple instances that were similar, all that followed was an inexplicable event. In some way, the victim withdrew her accusations, the case was quietly dropped, and the man avoided punishment. James went back to living his life as usual, staying out of the police's notice for the following 9 years until his arrest for Linda's murder. When asked if he had ever kidnapped the girls, the man denied any involvement. He claimed to have never seen Linda when shown a picture of her, saying that she reminded him of one of his daughters. In any case, the court ought to have found the suspect guilty because it was evident that his DNA was on the victim's body. Still, detectives made every effort to gather as much information as they could. They searched for evidence that James owned the turquoise van, but they were unable to locate any. But this was clarified very quickly. He worked in an apartment building and had access to the service van at the time of Linda's murder. Investigators discovered multiple hard drives containing the listed materials when searching his house. On his smartphone, there were also comparable images and videos. On his computer, there was also something intriguing. It transpired that James had researched the past of violent offenders apprehended via DNA testing. It seems that he was fully aware that the police could use DNA to connect him to a number of crimes. For the detectives, there was still another unexpected finding. James had Linda's name tattooed on his wrist following his examination prior to being placed in a cell. Investigators believed that he had done so as a memento of his victim. But as it happened, it was strange coincidence. The tattoo was obtained by James a long time prior to the murder, and the police verified this. The trial was scheduled to begin in February 2020, a year after the arrest of the pandemic caused it to be postponed. Although James persisted in claiming his innocence, investigators were convinced that he was the one who killed Linda. But a trial was never held in this case. James was hospitalized in May and passed away from lung cancer 2 days later. Prior to his arrest, he was unaware of this illness, and by the time it was discovered, it was too late to start treatment. And so, the 50-year-old case was finally closed. Investigators planned to continue looking into the possibility that James may have had numerous other victims. Linda's parents died before the culprit was apprehended by the authorities. Her mother, who declined to pick up the girl from school, blamed herself for everything that had happened to her during her life. Linda's sisters expressed their gratitude to the investigators for their perseverance and determination in solving the case. Their parents' passing before this day was the only thing they regretted. On the eve of Christmas in 2014, as the world hummed with festive cheer, Samina Imam, a 34-year-old marketing manager for Costco in Cardiff, South Wales, was preparing for the holiday season. She also had plans to visit her family in Essex the day after Christmas. But on Christmas Eve, Samina was all excited for a special date. Before heading for her date, Samina decided to make a quick stop at Costco to pick up a bottle of wine. Little did she know, this was the last time that anyone would see her. As Christmas passed, and Samina didn't return home to visit her family, her absence became a cause for concern. Her friends and family frantically tried reaching out to her, their hearts pounding with a growing sense of dread. Hours turned into days, but there was no sign of Samina. Where did she go? What could be the reason for her sudden disappearance? Cardiff, located in South Wales on the southeastern coast of the country, is the capital of Wales. Cardiff transforms into a winter wonderland during Christmas. The city is adorned with twinkling lights, charming Christmas markets pop up, and festive activities abound. For history buffs, Cardiff Castle stands tall, painting pictures of knights and ancient nobility within its walls. Wandering through Cardiff Market is a feast for the senses, with scents of freshly baked bread and spices filling the air, drawing you into a world of local flavors and crafts. Yet Cardiff isn't just about its history or market. It's alive with laughter, chats in the streets, and the genuine Welsh hospitality that fills its pubs and restaurants. From museums to the Wales Millennium Centre, Cardiff offers diverse experiences for everyone. But back on Christmas 2014, though the city gleamed under the warm glow of a million lights, unsettling shadows lurked beneath the surface. Samina Imam's life began in 1980 in the UK, nurtured by her loving father, Imam Dean, and a mother whose name remains cherished within the family. Her Pakistani heritage was a vibrant thread that wove through her life, enriching her with traditions and values. Samina's youth blossomed within the walls of Loxford High School in 1998, where she emerged as a bright and ambitious young woman. As a 34-year-old, Samina found herself in Coventry, where she took on the role of marketing manager at Costco. While details of her personal life are scarce, her presence was deeply valued, bringing joy to her family and colleagues. In 2014, amidst the bustling aisles of Costco, Samina's path crossed with 41-year-old Roger Cooper, a warehouse manager whose 2 decades of experience in logistics had kept him rooted in the same store. Their encounter marked the beginning of a new chapter in Samina's life, one filled with the promise of fresh beginnings. Everything seemed to be falling into place for Samina. Her days were filled with ease and contentment. However, on the eve of Christmas in 2014, an unforeseen event shattered her. As Samina eagerly awaited her date with Roger on Christmas Eve, she had also made special arrangements to visit her family. In particular, she planned to spend time with her ailing mother after the holiday festivities. On the eve of Christmas 2014, Roger pledged to spend the holidays with Samina, leading her to book a lavish two-night stay at the Malmaison Hotel in Birmingham. With £500 paid, she carefully arranged for meals to be served in their room, setting the stage for what was supposed to be a romantic Christmas celebration. As the clock struck 4 p.m. on Christmas Eve, Samina concluded her shift at the store. Little did she know that the journey ahead would deviate from the plans she had envisioned. After a brief stop at a liquor store to get a bottle of champagne, she began on her fateful drive toward the Malmaison Hotel. On her way there, she had a final conversation with her sister, during which she inquired about their mother's health. Samina assured her sister that she would be arriving at their parents' home on Boxing Day, December 26, 2014, eager to partake in the family's celebrations in Essex. This conversation underscored Samina's commitment to her family and her eagerness to be with them during the festive season. However, her unexplained disappearance following this conversation left her family deeply concerned. What was more concerning was the fact that Samina even texted her friends wishing them a Merry Christmas, but then suddenly ceased to reply. The abrupt halt in communication, coupled with Samina's failure to fulfill her planned visit, added to the distress surrounding her disappearance. This led to the police being alerted by Samina's family on December 26, 2014. The investigative saga commenced swiftly, and authorities were trying to do everything to get to the bottom of this crime. Media outlets, both local and social, rallied the community, amplifying the search efforts to locate her. A missing persons report was filed, prompting authorities to step in and join the search. The police talked to Samina's co-workers at the Costco in Coventry, who provided a crucial detail. One retail worker informed police that he last saw her departing the store around 4 p.m. on December 24th. It was the last time she was ever seen alive. Surveillance footage provided glimpses into Samina's last known movements, leaving her workplace, purchasing champagne, and departing in her car. Despite these visual clues, her precise location remained elusive. The West Midlands Police Department turned to cell tower data, using it to approximate Samina's whereabouts. On December 30, 2014, investigators traced Samina's movements to Leicester, precisely to the residence of David Cooper, Roger's brother, on Christmas Eve at 5 p.m. At the same time, Roger's phone records showed that he was also in the area. It seemed unlikely that it was a coincidence they were both there at the exact same time, raising questions about why they were there together. As the investigation got more complicated, they wanted to know who Samina was going to meet on Christmas Eve. Their attention zeroed in on Roger Cooper, the person she was supposed to spend the evening and the next night with. Roger Cooper was brought in for questioning on January 1, 2015. Now, he was the main person the investigators were looking at closely. While they were questioning Roger for details, a new piece of information emerged. Remember how Samina's last mobile signal led to David Cooper's location? Investigators considered interviewing David Cooper at the same time. While probing David Cooper's possible involvement, the investigators couldn't ignore a nagging question. If Samina and Roger had already booked hotel rooms, why were they at David's house? This added layer of mystery intensified the suspicions surrounding the case. Before diving deeper into the story, understanding the Cooper brothers becomes important. Their lives and connections might be essential in understanding the mystery surrounding Samina's case. Let's start with Samina's Christmas Eve date, Roger Cooper. He was born in Leicester around 1973 and excelled as a manager at the Birmingham Costco warehouse. He was admired for his leadership. However, beyond this public role, Roger led a secretive life, known only to a few, juggling multiple affairs, including one with Samina Imam and another unnamed Costco employee. He maintained a long-term relationship with his partner, Mira Chavda. Shockingly, Samina was unaware of his long-term commitment. This hidden reality exposed a more complicated and problematic side to Roger than anyone had realized. Roger's carefully constructed facade began to crumble when Semina discovered the shocking truth. Learning through a coworker about Roger's other relationships shattered her trust as it revealed a web of deceit and hidden liaisons. Now, turning our attention to Roger's brother, 39-year-old David Cooper, he added a surprising twist to the unfolding mystery. David, a former soldier, managed a cafe and worked as a doorman. Intriguingly, Semina's last cell phone signal led investigators to David's address in Leicester. The bond between Roger and David extended beyond family. They shared a close-knit relationship. The brothers shared a mutual love for Star Wars, often using cryptic phrases from the movies to communicate with each other, either referring to the lore of the movies or events from their daily lives. That being said, it's here that the real puzzle surfaces. Did David share any connection with her? These questions loomed large over the investigation, casting a shadow of uncertainty over the ties between Semina, Roger, and now his brother David. Let's look at the dynamics of Semina Imam and Roger Cooper's relationship. Was it genuine, or was Roger merely using her? At first glance, Roger and Semina appeared to be just another couple sharing laughter, secrets, and what seemed like genuine affection. Their connection was filled with playful banter and affectionate moments, a facade hiding the grim reality beneath the surface. Little did Semina know that she was just another woman in Roger's life. Despite his long-term commitment to his partner Mira, Roger found comfort in clandestine moments with Semina. At least, that's what Semina was made to believe. Initially, she didn't know that he was having a third relationship with another woman in the same store. Their relationship was shrouded in secrecy due to strict company policies against workplace relationships. Yet, their bond grew stronger, blurring the lines between right and wrong, until Semina found herself hopelessly entangled. She saw a future with Roger, a peaceful life together, but there was a catch. He was already entangled in multiple relationships. Despite the red flags, Semina clung to the hope that Roger would leave his family for her. As their relationship deepened, Semina's desperation for a settled life intensified. She confronted Roger, issuing an ultimatum towards the end of 2014, divorce his wife or lose her forever. The facade of their perfect relationship shattered when Semina discovered Roger's infidelity, another lover hidden in the shadows of their workplace. Enraged and betrayed, she threatened to expose their affair to his wife and their employer. Roger, adept at manipulation, managed to soothe Semina's anger, convincing her of his loyalty and promising to file for divorce after the holidays. He also said they'd go away on Christmas Eve for 2 nights. It was at the very beginning of this ill-fated trip that Semina disappeared. Now diving into the investigation, the police had their sights set firmly on Roger Cooper and were also wondering about the involvement of his brother David. On January 4th, 2015, Semina's car was found in Luton, about 65 miles away from Coventry. Her handbags, suitcases, and items she brought were missing. The lack of fingerprints made investigators suspicious, but there was another interesting detail. The driver's seat was adjusted for someone taller than Semina, possibly over 6 feet. This suggested that someone else used the car after her shopping trip. Additional evidence that the police found that pointed their suspicions towards the brothers involved multiple automatic number plate recognition hits, tracking their vehicles between Coventry and Leicester. A Bellini bottle purchased by Miss Imam on Christmas Eve in Coventry was discovered in David's home fridge, while Roger was Semina's date. The presence of the bottle in David's house raises the question, how did the bottle end up at David's house? These details added complexity to the investigation. During the investigation, the brothers, David and Roger, firmly denied any involvement in the crime, but their text messages told a different story. They used cryptic phrases from the movies to communicate secretly. Phrases like Death Star complete, stay on target, and you are expected Vader hinted at a hidden plan. One particularly puzzling French message, Seigneur Point, Elof, La Fronte n'est pas over, roughly translates to, there's no point, no score. The window of opportunity is closed, which caught attention. The message hinted at a closed opportunity or a mischance. The detectives interpreted their Star Wars messages as alluding to Miss Imam's abduction and murder. While the majority of their exchanges appeared to center around Star Wars, another concerning detail caught attention. David Cooper's eBay purchase history. He had recently purchased chloroform, a substance well known for use to knock people out, but which also can be lethal in larger doses. When coupled with Samina's missing car and the various intriguing details, the plot thickened. After all the clues and circumstantial evidence pointed towards the Cooper brothers, they were arrested on suspicion of murder on January 7, 2014 and brought in for questioning. During the interrogation of the Cooper brothers, subtle yet crucial disparities began to emerge in their narratives. Roger Cooper presented a detailed and emotionally charged account of his last encounter with Samina, a level of detail and emotion that the police found excessive. Conversely, David Cooper took a different stance, asserting that he had no real knowledge of who Samina Imam was. Recognizing David Cooper as the more vulnerable of the two, investigators intensified their pressure on him. This strategic approach, when applied effectively, can yield significant results, particularly when the person under scrutiny remains unaware of their alleged accomplice's statement. While he initially did try to mislead them, eventually, the police learned what actually happened on that fateful Christmas Eve. Samina had set off with Roger, believing they were headed to the Malmaison Hotel in Birmingham. Without Samina's knowledge, Roger was secretly directing their journey away from Birmingham, heading instead to a hidden location in Leicester, Roger's brother David Cooper's residence. As they arrived at David's house at Hughendon Drive around 5 p.m. on December 24th, Samina, unaware of her upcoming tragedy, greeted Roger's brother with genuine warmth. In a sudden and terrifying move, David and Roger launched themselves at Samina. The attack was horrifying. Samina's legs trembled, fear gripping her as she pleaded for help. She fought back, struggling against them. But David, with a cloth soaked in chloroform, covered her mouth and nose, silencing her cries until she couldn't breathe anymore. She faded away around 6:25 p.m., her efforts in vain against the overwhelming force. After the heinous act, Roger heartlessly headed back to Coventry, planning to spend Christmas Eve with his unsuspecting family. He left her body and her car with David, but it would take detectives some more time to figure out exactly what he had done with them. But David astonishingly confessed to assisting his brother in the horrendous act of killing Samina. The detectives learned that Samina tragically passed away due to chloroform toxicity. Investigators discovered compelling evidence in David's eBay purchase history, indicating a purchase of 200 milliliters of chloroform for £12, which he alleged never arrived. Further inquiries revealed David's movements, retrieving Samina's BMW from Coventry on Boxing Day and later abandoning it in Luton. He meticulously wiped away any fingerprints and DNA from the vehicle using a cleaning agent, methodically covering his tracks. Later, he also reveals how he tried to hide Samina's lifeless body. The callous act of killing someone and then referring to them as this thing speaks volumes about the perpetrator's lack of empathy and respect for human life. Such an act speaks to a disturbing level of dehumanization where the victim was stripped of their individuality and reduced to a mere object. This detached and callous language suggests that the act of killing was not just devoid of remorse, but potentially motivated by a deep-seated hatred or an animosity towards the victim. The dehumanizing language serves to further distance the perpetrator from the gravity of their actions, making it easier for them to justify and rationalize their behavior. David's continued refusal to disclose the location of Samina's body cast a long shadow of suspicion over him. His fabricated stories about others taking the body away only raise further questions. The fabricated stories appear to be a desperate attempt to distance himself from the crime and deflect suspicion. Such behavior is characteristic of individuals who have something to hide, further fueling the flames of doubt surrounding their innocence. While David initially misled the authorities about Samina's whereabouts, a crucial piece of evidence emerged that ultimately led to the discovery of the truth. A friend of David's, prompted by his arrest, came forward and revealed that David had entrusted him with a set of keys, including one that belonged to an allotment he owned in Leicester. The police, acting swiftly on this information, descended upon the allotment, carrying the weight of hope and determination. On January 16, 2015, The long-held silence surrounding Samina's disappearance was shattered, leaving hearts broken. Upon arrival at David's allotment, an unsettling sight greeted them. A sheet of tarpaulin lay crumpled on the ground with a suspicious mound of earth beneath it. Footprints, fresh and clear, marked the surrounding area. As they carefully excavated the soil, the grim reality unfolded. Samina Imam's body was found in Leicester, owned by David Cooper, a seemingly ordinary structure now at the center of a disturbing discovery. The haphazard manner in which the body was concealed spoke volumes about the perpetrator's state of mind. It was a stark contrast to the meticulous planning seemingly evident in the earliest stages of the crime. The haste and lack of proper concealment suggested that their focus was solely on the act itself, with little thought given to evading detection or ensuring a successful cover-up. This botched attempt ultimately led to their undoing and exposed the truth to the light of justice. Most disturbingly, Samina's body was found wrapped in cling film and a sleeping bag that belonged to David Cooper, serving as concrete evidence of his involvement in this tragic crime. Adding to the grimness was a sign hanging on the shed, its message blunt: "Don't wind me up. I'm running out of places to hide the bodies." The West Midlands police investigation was determined and thorough. They followed every lead carefully, leaving no stone unturned, and pieced together the events leading to Samina's tragic end. What made this ordeal particularly unsettling wasn't only the discovery of Samina's remains. The sign, meant as a joke, became a chilling confession, revealing the darkness lurking beneath ordinary surfaces. It was as if the perpetrator was challenging the law enforcement itself. Post-mortem examinations confirmed that the Cardiff-based shop worker met her demise due to chloroform. Additionally, a peculiar mix of metallic elements, antimony, cadmium, tin, mercury, and arsenic was likely administered to Samina Imam in a liquid form. During the 8-week trial, the chilling truth emerged. Roger Cooper carefully planned to silence Samina Imam for months, fearing she would expose their affair. The brothers, 41-year-old Roger and 39-year-old David Cooper, remained composed during their trial, avoiding eye contact as the jury unanimously convicted them at Birmingham Crown Court. Later, on October 20, 2015, during the trial, Roger made a shocking admission, revealing that a seemingly puzzling message, "You are expected, Vader," was actually a coded reference to Miss Imam. He claimed it was part of a surveillance effort to determine if she was involved with someone else. But the truth was the brothers' first attempt to harm Samina Imam took place way before in December at Soil Hill Premier Inn. Samina was a regular guest and planned to spend the night there following a Christmas party. Under the guise of a surprise, Roger had instructed Samina to meet him at the hotel, claiming to have booked a room for them. However, the surprise was a lie. No room had been booked and Roger wasn't planning to be there. Meanwhile, David, Roger's brother, lurked in a rented car parked in the hotel's car park, prepared to abduct Samina. To communicate their plan, the brothers relied on cryptic messages coded in Star Wars references like "Death Star complete" and "Stay on target, stay on target." You are expected, however, on that day, the taxi stopped right at the entrance, which didn't give David a chance to get close to Samina. The plan failed and Samina safely entered the hotel. Frustrated, David sent a message to his brother in broken French, which translated to, "There's no point, no score. The window of opportunity is closed." Samina, just 34 and one of Roger's lovers, was later overpowered on Christmas Eve of 2014 at David Cooper's home, meeting a tragic death by chloroform. Despite their calm facade and planning, justice caught up with the brothers. Arrested under suspicion a week before Samina's body was discovered, they couldn't escape the truth uncovered by post-mortem tests. Their arrest and subsequent conviction by Judge Thomas on October 21, 2015 led to a life sentence for each with a minimum of 30 years of prison time. While sentencing the Cooper brothers, the killers, for life, Judge Thomas told the siblings, "The use of poison in a case such as this demonstrates a cold-blooded intention to kill, regardless of the consequences. You work together hand in glove in planning and carrying out the murder of a joyful and bubbly young woman, brutally betrayed by a man she loved and his brother." DCI Caroline Marsh, senior investigating officer, shared her views on this case outside court. She said, I would say this is the most callous offense I've ever investigated. Most murders that occur are spontaneous events driven by anger or jealousy. Whereas in this case, what we uncovered was weeks and weeks of planning to kill Samina and a really unusual cause of death. We rarely see chloroform homicides. It's a mystery to the investigation why David Cooper would do something like this for his brother. An extreme act. To kill a woman that he hardly knew. Their cryptic messages and meticulous planning failed in the face of justice, ensuring they'll spend all of their remaining Christmases behind bars, serving their deserved punishment. The anguish of losing Samina in such cruel circumstances was overwhelming for the family. The statement released by Samina's younger brother Imran Imam reflected the profound impact of her loss. He mourned not only the loss of his sister, but also the absence of her guidance and support during challenging times. Imran expressed the torment of contemplating Samina's final moments and the pain of not being able to seek her counsel anymore. The reminders of her absence were constant, with everyday triggers evoking memories that intensified their grief. This made it even more challenging to come to terms with their loss. The family's sentiments echoed a collective sense of shock, sorrow, and fear, as they grappled with the reality of Samina's untimely and tragic demise, leaving an irreparable void in their lives. As we close this chapter on the tragedy of Samina Imam, it's impossible not to be shaken by the sheer senselessness of it all. Roger had countless opportunities to avoid this irreversible path. He could have chosen honesty, transparency, or even simply ending the relationship. Instead, he and his brother embarked on a calculated, cruel course of action that resulted in the loss of a vibrant life. This case stands as a stark example of the devastating consequences that can unfold when we prioritize personal desires over basic human decency. Let it serve as a cautionary tale, urging us to choose compassion and integrity over expediency and self-interest. May Samina's memory inspire us to uphold the values of honesty, respect, and accountability, ensuring that such a tragedy never befalls another innocent soul. On January 24, 1991, at 4:45 p.m., 13-year-old Paula Ilera returned home from school in East Harlem, New York. After being buzzed in by her mother, she entered the elevator of her apartment building and made her way to the 30th floor where her family lived. However, during this short journey, Paula mysteriously disappeared. 3 hours later, around 7:30 p.m., a man walking his dog discovered Paula's lifeless body half a mile away from her home. This tragic event left the neighborhood with unsettling questions about what had happened to Paula and who could be responsible for her disappearance and death. The Ala and her family were an integral part of the East Harlem community, also known as El Barrio, situated in the heart of Manhattan, New York City. This culturally vibrant neighborhood is renowned for its diverse mix of traditions, art, and strong sense of community. East Harlem proudly embraces its Hispanic and Latino heritage, evident in its lively festivals, eateries, and vibrant street murals. The neighborhood is also home to the esteemed Museum of the City of New York, which showcases the city's rich history. According to statistics, the likelihood of being the victim of crime in East Harlem is approximately 1 in 22, setting the backdrop for our story. Paula Ilera was born in Colombia in the late 1970s to her parents, Cesar and Olga Ilera. She had 2 older siblings, Julio and Alexandra. In June of 1990, Paula, along with her mother and siblings, moved to East Harlem, New York City, in search of a better life. They resided on the 30th floor of an apartment building located at 420 East 111th Street, where they lived with Paula's uncle Guillermo Espina. Meanwhile, her father, Cesar, remained in Colombia, working as a taxi driver and saving money to eventually join his family in New York. Upon their arrival in New York, Paula enrolled in junior high school. According to her sister, Alexandra, Paula excelled academically and dedicated her spare time to studying English and mathematics. She possessed only a small circle of companions, primarily her classmates, and had aspirations of becoming a lawyer in order to assist those in need. Her uncle Guillermo regarded her as exceptionally intelligent and mature for her age, displaying the level of thinking that surpassed her years. He also observed that Paula found great joy in New York due to her fondness for the English language. According to her uncle Guillermo, she was a young girl with numerous ambitions for the future. Paula and her family seemed to be progressing smoothly until a devastating incident abruptly altered the course of their lives. On the chilly afternoon of January 24, 1991, Paula, who was merely 13 years old at the time, departed from her school and made her way back to the familiar surroundings of her apartment building. At approximately 4:45 p.m., she arrived at the building's entrance and utilized the intercom to contact her apartment. Her mother, Olga, responded and granted her access by pressing the button to unlock the lobby door. Little did Olga know that this ordinary interaction would be the last one she would share with her beloved daughter. With the door now open, Paula entered the lobby and stepped into an elevator. However, tragically, she never reached their 30th floor apartment. 10 minutes later, when Paula had not yet arrived home, her brother and uncle grew concerned. They sensed that something was awry and decided to search for her. As they hurried down to the lobby, they discovered it to be completely deserted. They frantically scoured the neighborhood for Paula, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air. 3 hours later, around 7:30 p.m., a man who was out walking his dog made a chilling discovery. He came across a lifeless figure lying on a walkway near the East River. The area was strewn with drug-related paraphernalia such as vials, syringes, and used lighters. Tragically, the lifeless figure he found was Paula's slender body, and she had passed away. The location where she was discovered was situated approximately half a mile south of the apartment building where she resided. When detectives arrived at the scene, they were confronted with an immensely sorrowful sight. There were no leads to indicate the perpetrator of this crime. The only items found on Paula's body were a new Kids on the Block watch and a piece of chalk. Paula's murder deeply impacted her family and the entire neighborhood. Her mother Olga was devastated, struggling to accept the loss of her daughter. Students and teachers at Paula's school were shocked by the tragedy. In the aftermath, teachers held meetings with students to offer support to those close to Paula, helping them deal with their sorrow. They also cautioned students against walking alone in the area for safety. Reporters were barred from entering the school, and the principal, along with district officials, refused to speak with them. Detectives were left with many unanswered questions. They canvassed the 30th floor building, hoping to find witnesses who saw Paula in the vicinity where her body was discovered. Unfortunately, no one had seen her there. Additionally, the detectives had no description of the person responsible for the crime. It was unclear whether Paula was killed at the location where her body was found, filled with crack vials, or elsewhere. During their investigation, the detectives uncovered crucial information. They learned that Paula often stayed late at school for a journalism workshop on Wednesdays and Thursdays. On the day of her murder, she was working on an article about her father as a Valentine's Day gift. The detectives also discovered that Paula left the school after the workshop around 4:00 p.m. and walked north on First Avenue with a friend. They parted ways at 106th Street, with Paula heading towards her family's apartment building. During their investigation, the detectives gathered information that revealed another teenager, Aram Warford, had entered the same elevator as Paula. However, during their conversation with him, he stated that he had exited on the 19th floor while Paula continued her ascent. Consequently, the detectives redirected their focus away from him as a potential suspect. The autopsy provided a harrowing account of the extent of Paula's suffering. She had been violated, strangled, and stabbed 3 times near her heart. The medical examiner also observed peculiar elongated marks on her thighs. It was evident that Paula had valiantly resisted her attacker, who had forcefully spread her legs, resulting in bruises that matched the shape of fingers. Additionally, the examiner collected male hair from her body, which was preserved as evidence. On February 2, 1991, Paula was laid to rest at St. Michael's Cemetery in East Elmhurst, Queens. For months after her tragic murder, Paula's family made the decision to relocate to Flushing, New York, where they received support from Victim Services, a private nonprofit organization aiding victims of violent crimes and their families. In Flushing, Olga sought solace through counseling at the Families of Homicide Victims program, also operated by victim services. As the family continued to cope and heal, they clung to the hope of attaining justice for Paula. However, as time passed, the case gradually grew colder and the pursuit of answers became increasingly arduous. The murder of a 13-year-old girl should have garnered significant media attention in any city at any time. Regrettably, in the violence-plagued New York of 1991, this horrific crime in East Harlem went largely unnoticed. Between 1990 and 1992, the city reported over 2,000 murders annually, with an average of 6 bodies discovered daily across the 5 boroughs of New York City. Unfortunately, the majority of these incidents occurred in impoverished, predominantly minority neighborhoods such as East Harlem, the South Bronx, and East New York, Brooklyn. Unfortunately, only a handful of these cases garnered significant attention from the media. Instead, the media tended to focus on more high-end crimes involving affluent, white victims in picturesque settings. Due to the lack of media coverage and political pressure, Paula's case was classified as a low-priority homicide. Consequently, her murder went unsolved and was largely forgotten throughout most of the 1990s. In the mid-1990s, crime rates in New York City were decreasing. However, in the housing projects of East Harlem, a troubling pattern persisted. A series of apparently unrelated incidents emerged, all involving the assault and murder of young, attractive teenagers, regardless of their race. In 1994, a 15-year-old girl fell victim to an attacker wielding a knife. This incident unveiled a consistent modus operandi employed by the perpetrator, which he repeated multiple times over the next 4 years. He would approach the teenager from behind, lead her to a secluded spot, blindfold her with a piece of her own clothing, coerce her to undress, and then subject her to assault. Surprisingly, the 15-year-old survivor managed to provide a description of her assailant. He was a well-groomed young man with a muscular physique and an inflated sense of self-worth. Shockingly, he even informed the victim that she should consider herself lucky to be assaulted by someone as good-looking as himself. A few years later, on September 10, 1997, firefighters were called to a rooftop fire at the George Washington houses on East 104th Street. Upon investigation, they found the lifeless body of a woman who had been severely abused, struck with a blunt object, and burned beyond recognition. This victim was later identified as 19-year-old Johalis Castro, who had relocated to New York from the Dominican Republic with her family. Johalis, a young mother with a daughter, had been pursuing her studies in computer science at a community college in the Bronx. 7 months later, in April of 1998, a 13-year-old girl became the next victim in the same neighborhood. Fortunately, this young victim was able to escape with her life. 2 months after that, on June 2, 1998, 17-year-old Rashida Washington met a tragic end. She was discovered in a 15th-floor stairwell of an East 112th Street housing project, having been robbed, assaulted, and strangled. When Rashida's body was found, it was not immediately clear what had transpired. Her lifeless body, covered by a shirt, was positioned in a seated stance against the wall. Similar to the previous victims, Rashida, a fashion student who worked at a clothing boutique, was petite, weighing only 100 pounds. Sadly, she was murdered just 3 days after celebrating her 18th birthday. In that same year, during the autumn, 2 more young teenagers fell victim to assaults in the same area. A 15-year-old was attacked on September 25, 1998, followed by a 14-year-old on November 16th. Thankfully, these 2 adolescents survived, likely because they did not get a good look at the attacker before being blindfolded. Despite the ongoing similar cases, the police did not publicly acknowledge the possibility of a serial murderer targeting teenage girls in East Harlem. However, due to the concerns raised by the parents of the victims, the police eventually decided to take immediate action. In the 1990s, there was a relatively small database of DNA samples on record because widespread testing of convicted felons had not yet begun. However, a significant breakthrough occurred in the autumn of 1998. Regarding the East Harlem cases, New York police forensics experts compared bodily fluid evidence from Rashida Washington's murder with evidence from 2 other similar cases in the neighborhood. These tests definitively linked the same perpetrator to all 3 crimes. Finally, Detectives had concrete evidence confirming the existence of a serial criminal preying on teenagers in Harlem. In response, the police leadership formed a specialized task force consisting of detectives with a specific goal of capturing the suspect. They took action by circulating the wanted poster featuring a sketch of the serial attacker based on descriptions provided by the victims. Following the distribution of the flyer in East Harlem, a tipster suggested that the detectives focus their investigation on a 25-year-old man known as Ace residing on the 19th floor of the same building where Powell had lived. The police quickly discovered Ace's real name to be Aaron Key, triggering a memory of the name Aaron from Powell's murder case. The detectives recalled Aaron Warford, a teenager who had been seen entering the elevator with Paula and claimed to have exited on the 19th floor. The unique first name Aaron also appeared in the investigation of Jalhalis Castro's murder in 1997. Phone records revealed that Jalhalis had made several calls to a man named Aaron Key in the days leading up to her death. When questioned, Aaron explained that Jalhalis was a friend of his girlfriend, Jacqueline, and they were planning a shopping trip on the day of her murder. Jacqueline corroborated Aaron's statement during her interview with the police. It was later discovered that Aaron Warford and Aaron Key were the same person, with Warford being his father's last name and Key his mother's. This revelation linked Aaron to 2 of the 3 victims in the suspected serial killer case. As he was the last person seen with Paula before her death and had significant phone communication with Jalhalis prior to her murder. These connections raised suspicions, prompting detectives to delve deeper into Aaron's background. He was identified as an intelligent and fairly articulate individual. Born on September 18, 1973, he spent a majority of his childhood in East Harlem. At the time of Paula's disappearance in 1991, he resided with relatives in the same building. Aaron was known for his charm and had a talent for working with computers. He claimed to be involved in rap music production, although there was limited evidence to support this assertion. In terms of physical appearance, stood at a height of 5 feet 8 inches and possessed a handsome demeanor. His criminal record only showed 1 arrest for theft in 1990, and he had minimal or no time spent behind bars. However, neighbors had a different perception of Aaron. They described him as having a troubling side, often peering through the peepholes of women in the building and frequently carrying the portable video camera to capture inappropriate footage. At this point, the police lacked substantial evidence against Aaron, but they recognized the importance of conducting the thorough investigation. Their focus shifted towards the assailant involved in the September 1998 incident, who had left behind a black cap and a gray sweatshirt. The detectives decided to closely examine these clothing items for potential leads. Their efforts paid off when they discovered a laundry tag on one of the garments, leading them to a dry cleaner near Aaron's residence. What made this discovery even more significant was the fact that Aaron's mother, Cynthia, was listed as a client at this dry cleaner. Every piece of information seemed to point towards Aaron as the primary suspect, and law enforcement became increasingly convinced that conducting a DNA test would confirm his involvement in the crimes. However, a significant obstacle stood in their way. Aaron did not have a DNA record since mandatory DNA testing for accused felons in New York would not commence until the year 2000. In the 1990s, obtaining a DNA sample was not as simple as bringing in a suspect and requesting a SWAT. DNA tests were considered invasive procedures, requiring judicial authorization based on reasonable suspicion to acquire a sample. Despite substantial circumstantial evidence pointing to Aaron's involvement, details like the elevator ride, phone calls, and the laundry tag alone were insufficient to convince a judge to order a DNA sample. As a result, the police had to come up with an alternative plan. Initially, they attempted to tail Aaron in the hopes that he would unknowingly leave behind a saliva sample through spitting or disposing of chewing gum. However, this strategy proved unsuccessful. Detectives finally had a breakthrough on February 8, 1999, when Aaron was arrested for stealing a computer hard drive. Since there were no laws mandating DNA testing for arrested individuals in New York at that time, the police resorted to a bit of deception to obtain a DNA sample. A female detective disguised herself as a doctor and approached Aaron, asking for a saliva sample under the guise of a routine osteoporosis test. Despite handing him paperwork to sign, Aaron, being cautious, refused to cooperate upon noticing a line mentioning DNA analysis. He cited his faith as a Jehovah's Witness, which prohibited him from participating in medical treatment. After tearing his paper cup into pieces and flushing them down the toilet, he swapped cups with a cellmate to further confuse investigators. However, the police were prepared and had already taken steps to secure the necessary evidence. Shortly after Aram's arrest, he found himself in a shared holding cell with several other men. While they were there, the attendants provided them with cups of water. The detectives were able to locate these cups in a waste paper basket and sent them for DNA testing. In just a matter of days, the results came back, confirming that a sample collected from the rim of one of the cups found in the police holding cell matched the DNA of the East Harlem criminal. By the time the DNA test results were ready on February 12, 1999, Aron had already been released without bail, as he was only facing a misdemeanor charge related to computer theft. Meanwhile, the New York Police Department offered an $11,000 reward for any information that could lead to his arrest. Authorities soon discovered that Aron had traveled to Brownsville, Brooklyn, and met up with his 16-year-old girlfriend named Angelique Stallings. Her parents believed that they were going on a Valentine's Day date. However, instead of sticking to their plans, Aron and Angelique boarded a bus headed for Florida from Newark, New Jersey. Detectives grew concerned that Angelique might be in danger, potentially facing the same fate as the previous victims. After Aron arrived in South Florida, he made 2 phone calls to another girlfriend back in New York. By this time, news of this status as a suspected serial killer on the run had made headlines. The second girlfriend, aware of the situation, promptly contacted the police and provided information that Aron was staying at the Miami Sun Hotel, located just 2 blocks from the beach on Northeast 1st Avenue in downtown Miami. Responding to this tip, 2 New York detectives rushed to the hotel and began surveilling it. When they spotted Aron and Angelique walking around inside, they called the Miami-Dade SWAT team for assistance. The SWAT team stormed the building and discovered Aron and Angelique hiding under the bed on the hotel's floor. On February 19, 1999, Aron was apprehended and placed in custody. When detectives tried to question Aron regarding the East Harlem crimes, he chose to remain silent and withhold any information. However, the police devised a strategy. They later watched and listened from behind a 2-way mirror as they permitted Angelique to enter the interrogation room. Aron and Angelique thought they were having a private moment to bid farewell. During their conversation, Angelique urged Aron to clarify why he had carried out the crimes. Aron's response was enigmatic. He mentioned that he had bugged out and claimed to have been unwell. Following a prolonged 4-month legal dispute, Aron was eventually extradited to New York to stand trial on 22 felony charges linked to 4 assaults and the killings of Paula Ellera, Johalis Castro, and Rashida Washington. DNA evidence linked Aron to 6 out of the 7 cases. Throughout the trial in the autumn of 2000, prosecutors John Irwin and Richard Plansky put forth a compelling case with a deluge of testimonies and DNA evidence against Aron. They summoned 130 prosecution witnesses, including 2 of Aron's victims. Aron himself insisted on being the initial defense witness to testify. Over the span of 2 days of testimony, Aron exhibited a variety of emotions, from laughing like a schoolgirl to weeping like a baby. He also voiced his frustration at being prosecuted. His soliloquy, which was largely unimpeded by the judge, prosecutors, or his own lawyers, touched on a wide array of subjects such as pop culture, drugs, rap music, jail food, and his musings on the criminal justice system. With numerous family members of his victims in attendance in the courtroom, Aron spun a peculiar tale to elucidate why he found himself facing charges of savage serial violence against young women. He claimed that the police had colluded to frame him as part of a cover-up orchestrated by a corrupt medical examiner involved in the illicit trade of human organs. He even alleged that his DNA had been tampered with in what he termed genetic shuffling. However, the jury was not convinced by his intricate tale. On December 16, 2000, when the guilty verdict was announced, the courtroom erupted in cheers. As Aron was escorted past the grieving relatives, he directed a vulgar curse at them. During the sentencing a month later, in January 2001, the family members of Aron's victims had the opportunity to directly address him. Alba's mother, spoke to him, expressing her hope that he would comprehend the torment of sleepless nights, loss of appetite, the inability to walk or breathe, and the absence of peace, all while thinking about her daughter's suffering at the time of her death. Olga shared her enduring pain, having brought her daughter to the country in pursuit of the American dream. When it was Aaron's turn to speak at the sentencing hearing, he broke down in tears and apologized. In response, a male cousin of Jalhalis Castro erupted in anger and attempted to leap over the barrier to attack Aaron. Following this, Justice Joan Soldanek delivered the sentence. She imposed 3 life sentences on Aaron, each without the possibility of parole for the 3 murders. Additionally, he received a 400-year sentence for 4 counts of abuse. Aaron was incarcerated in the Clinton Correctional Facility located in Dannemora, New York. By the time Aaron was sentenced, lawmakers in New York and many other states had enacted laws mandating DNA testing for individuals arrested in connection with violent crimes. Since then, this testing has been expanded to include most felony arrests, encompassing both violent and nonviolent offenses. Furthermore, certain jurisdictions have initiated DNA testing for individuals arrested for misdemeanors. For Olga, the agony of losing Paula remains as fresh as ever. She understands all too well that the anguish resulting from the sudden and senseless loss of a loved one does not diminish with time, especially when so many unanswered questions persist. 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton was the youngest of 3 children and lived with her mother Patty in St. Martin's, Missouri, a small rural town of just over 1,000 people. Elizabeth loved all things theater and performing and had just been cast in the school play, which she was throwing herself into wholeheartedly. She was running through her lines every day with anyone that would read the other parts with her, practicing her songs and asking her siblings to act alongside her. She would find any excuse to dress up and sing along to Hannah Montana and Taylor Swift. Everyone said she was a very sweet, innocent, and kind-hearted girl, always so friendly and caring and looking out for everyone she knew. She and her mother Patty were especially close, loving to bake together and play puzzles and games. October 21st, 2009 was a typical Wednesday. Everybody was back from school and the dinner was being cooked. One of Elizabeth's friends, Emma, knocked on Patty's door and asked if Elizabeth could go out and play with her. Patty at first said no because it was a school night and the family meal was almost ready. But after her daughter heard Emma at the door, both girls were relentless in trying to go out together, jumping up and down and begging for Patty to let them go. Emma lived just 4 houses away and the pair and their other siblings were at each other's homes a lot. Patty told Elizabeth she had 1 hour and no more and she wanted her home by 6:15 p.m. Elizabeth was still not home and it was 15 minutes past the agreed time, which for a child as conscientious as Elizabeth was a reason to be concerned. The sun was setting and Patty said there was no way her daughter would still be out voluntarily as she was terrified of the dark. Patty called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She then rang Emma's grandmother Karen, whom Emma and her siblings lived with. To her horror, Karen said she hadn't seen Elizabeth either, and she had no idea that Emma had even knocked at her door that afternoon. Patty hung up straight away and called the police. By 6:30, officers were at Patty's house and combing through the area. The street the family lived on was very close to about 60 acres of woodland, and this was a huge yet overwhelming focus for the search teams. The police headed over to Emma's house, but they all maintained she hadn't been there. Karen and Gary, Emma's grandparents, were so upset they had no idea this had all happened, but they simply couldn't give any information that would help. All they could do was join in the search. Despite the fact their houses were connected by the street, which would have only taken a few minutes to walk, Emma said they had been walking through and around the woods and had been darting in and out of the neighboring lawns and backyards. She said an hour later, the incredibly diligent Elizabeth set off home as instructed. Emma said she watched her walk off and that was the last time she had seen her. Officers said they still couldn't see any evidence that pointed towards foul play or anything untoward, suggesting maybe she had become lost in the woods, to which Patty replied, "She's 9 years old. She wouldn't just walk off by herself." Soon, almost a third of the whole town was out and looking, but the search party eventually had to slow down and stop for the night because of how dark it was. As soon as the sun rose, they were out in force again. A few hours later, with the concern continuing to mount, the FBI was called in to help, and they moved quickly. Registered sex offenders in the area were all interviewed. Each car coming in and out was stopped and searched. Dive teams and helicopters were deployed, and sniffer dogs were brought in too. The team started looking at Elizabeth's phone activity and ordered the information from her cell phone provider. The data arrived quickly and showed that her phone was still on and was actually pinging near her home and in the woods. It was now 24 hours later, a painfully long amount of time when dealing with a missing child. There were no items of clothing found, no dropped phone, no clues at all. Unfortunately, when they were searching the location that linked to her phone battery suddenly went dead and the ping stopped. The forest was dense, dark, damp, and cold, and there was a huge amount of ground to cover. The more time that was passing, the less likely it was seeming that they were going to have a positive outcome in the search for Elizabeth. Elizabeth's phone records also came back, and they were able to look at her last contacts and messages, as well as some of the Patty and several others that could be easily accounted for. She had received a call that afternoon from someone called Alyssa. 6-year-old Emma then asked to talk to the police again. She now had a new story but seemed scared to tell the detectives. She said that her half-sister had been the one to get her to knock on Elizabeth's door that afternoon. Her half-sister was 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante. Emma said that when the two were outside playing together, Alyssa came and joined them and encouraged Emma to leave them alone. Elizabeth said she had to head home and started walking off. This timed perfectly with the call that came from Alyssa. Emma walked back to her house and stayed outside playing alone, leaving Elizabeth and Alyssa out together. A while later, Emma, who was now back in her garden, fell over and caught herself on some thorns. She called out for help. Alyssa heard her from her bedroom and came outside. Emma said as she was helping her, she noticed something that looked like blood on Alyssa's clothes. Detectives asked Alyssa a few routine questions, and despite the fact she seemed open and forthcoming, something about what Emma had told them wasn't sitting right. If what Emma was saying was true, it meant that she hadn't been the last person to see Elizabeth that day. As far as they now knew, it was actually 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante. It was now 48 hours later, and the investigating team had to regroup. It was now glaringly obvious that Elizabeth had not run away. She had either been led somewhere or forced somewhere, and officers started looking closer to home. As they began doing rounds of the houses again, a search party inside the woods made a strange discovery. A group of volunteers had stumbled upon a huge hole that had been dug up, then covered back over. They alerted police right away, but there was nothing under the soil. There was still no sign of Elizabeth or anything belonging to her in that area. When detectives had been at the Bustamante house talking to Emma and Alyssa, they had noticed several holes in the garden that looked similar in size and shape to this one. Given this, a warrant was issued to properly and intensely search the home. Although Elizabeth definitely hadn't been there that day, she would often go over and play, so they needed to take a good look around. Everything seemed normal and in order until they entered Alyssa's room. Painted a very troubling and chilling picture. Everything was everywhere, and there was writing all over the walls, some parts in blood. There was also a drawing of an outline of a person with the name Emma next to it, her 6-year-old sister. Cards from her father, who was in prison, were scattered around the room, and buried under everything, detectives found Alyssa's diary. One entry read, "I don't talk about it, I bottle it up, and when I explode, someone's gonna die." They also noticed a paragraph that was scribbled over in blue pen. Fortunately, investigators were able to uncover some of the original writing by shining a light on the back of the paper. 2 words stood out: slit and throat. Despite Alyssa saying she had been at school that day, it would turn out she had actually skipped lessons, and her whereabouts around the time Elizabeth was last seen as Emma was saying goodbye to her weren't able to be confirmed by anyone either. Things were slowly being pieced together, but there were still so many gaps. Alyssa's diary was seized by the FBI and handed over to Sergeant David Rice, who was now preparing to interview the teen. Born in 1994, Alyssa came from a troubled and very broken family. Both her parents had substance addictions. Her father was in and out of prison, and her mother would often leave the family home on drugs binges. Eventually, Alyssa and her siblings went to live with her grandparents, Karen and Gary, who soon gained full custody of them. Karen said she adored Alyssa, and although the children had had a tough life, she did her best to raise them well, shower them with love and care, and be a constant and supportive presence in their lives. As she entered her teenage years, Alyssa started self-harming and expressing suicidal feelings. She was admitted into a psychiatric hospital after she overdosed and began to cut words into her arms. Doctors that assessed her described her as violent and angry. She was diagnosed with severe depression and prescribed antidepressants. When she was released, things only began to get worse and more concerning. On her various social media platforms, she changed her list of hobbies to killing people and cutting. She often told friends and her boyfriend she wanted to know what it was like to kill someone and had a dream of burning down a house with a family inside. Her Twitter feed talked about a hatred of authority and people telling her what to do. One of her posts read, "Bad decisions make great stories." She also posted a video to her YouTube channel called Idiots Getting Electrocuted by Electric Fence. The video showed her trying to get her two brothers to touch a fence that she knew would electrocute them. A disturbing pattern of behavior was clear to see, and the more the FBI looked into her background, the more they found pointed towards her being a dangerous individual that wanted to inflict pain on people in the worst ways imaginable. After going through her diary some more, Sergeant Reese Astalis had to come in for a formal interview alongside her grandmother and a juvenile officer. He said as the interview progressed, his tactic was to ask a question and sit in silence for as long as possible, sometimes for up to a minute at a time. He said as uncomfortable as it was, he knew the team would break eventually if there was something to say, which he was certain there was. He needed to know what had happened to Elizabeth that day, and he wasn't going to stop until he got to the truth. Alyssa started off by recounting her day. She said she had come back from school at around 3:30 and then had gone for a walk in the forest at around 4:30, 5 p.m. They now knew she was never at school that day, so she was already trapping herself in lies. She said she was supposed to take Emma on a walk with her, but ditched her as she was annoying and instead went walking alone. She claimed she had come back about an hour later and was up in her room when she heard Emma shouting for help from outside. Sergeant Rice got her to retrace her steps with a map he had printed out. Alyssa said after this, everybody went to church and got home at around 8 p.m. Rice then changed the line of questioning and moved onto the holes around her garden and around the woods. Alyssa calmly admitted to having dug them herself, but said it was because she liked digging holes and sometimes buried dead animals in them. He then said, "What kind of person do you think would do this to a 9-year-old girl?" Alyssa shrugged and said, "I don't know, a sick person, someone that can put down all their morals." She was still maintaining that she had never been out with Elizabeth on her own. It was always in a group of siblings, and she had been trying her best to help find her as well. After this, he started asking questions about Elizabeth's phone, explaining that the data did not lie and it was indicating that her phone was somewhere behind Alyssa's house, which she showed her on a map. He then moved on to Alyssa's house and her bedroom. When Rice confronted her about the entries, including the one that had been scribbled over, the interview would take a drastic turn. Alyssa said the pair had been playing out in the forest and Elizabeth had fallen, hit her head and died instantly. Panicked, she had tried to conceal her body by burning it. But given the final entry in her diary, Rice knew this wasn't true. But it was the start of the truth coming out. He just had to keep chipping away and poking holes in her stories. The entry in her diary that had been scribbled over had now been completely uncovered, and it read as follows. "I just fucking killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throats and stabbed them. Now they're dead. I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, oh my god, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kinda nervous and shaky though right now. Kay, I gotta go to church now. LOL." It had been written on the same day Elizabeth had gone missing, October 21st. Rice told her they would find Elizabeth's body eventually, and when they did, an autopsy would tell them the full story. Alyssa told Rice that she had bumped into Elizabeth and Emma outside, and once Emma had gone, everything started to unravel. Despite her denials it was pre-planned, she was already armed with a kitchen knife. Holding the 9-year-old's hand, the pair walked for 15 minutes, deep into the forest. With Alyssa telling her she had something to show her, they just had to walk further in. Once they reached a certain spot, Alyssa said she beat and strangled her before slitting her throat and stabbing her repeatedly. The fear that Elizabeth must have felt as the forest got darker and she realized her life was in danger is unimaginable. Alyssa then said she had attempted to burn her body before digging a hole to bury her and disposing of everything else in the creek. However, Rice knew that the hole had not been dug on that day. It had been dug days before, as were all the other holes they had found. She didn't go out there with a shovel or anything she could have used to do this, and there was no way she could have killed Elizabeth, dug a hole to bury her, and been back home within the hour to go to church. If Rice could get her to admit to pre-digging the hole, it would help to prove premeditation. Everybody still found it hard to believe that Alyssa had managed to do this all by herself, but she swore it was just her, and she was the only one that knew about it. Alyssa Bustamante agreed to take Rice to her remains, and with this, just 15 minutes from her home, the search for Elizabeth Alton came to a devastating end. A day after Elizabeth was found, police announced that they had placed the 15-year-old under arrest, and she had been charged with first-degree murder. The neighborhood was horrified. Police had also interviewed Alyssa's boyfriend and asked him to undertake a polygraph test. Although they suspected he likely knew something had happened, they determined he didn't have anything to do with the murder of Elizabeth, and he was never implicated in anything. Other than the fact she had just wanted to know what it was like to kill someone, given her diary entry, there was no other explanation. She had dug 2 graves in the weeks before and essentially waited for an opportunity. It remains undetermined who, if anyone, the second grave was intended for, but police suspected she was actually planning to kill her 2 younger brothers. On October 28th, a week after she had gone missing, 9-year-old Elizabeth Alton was laid to rest. Her favorite color was pink, and her funeral was filled with the color. A horse-drawn carriage carried her pink and white casket. The community was a close one, and it was packed with people standing along the sides and waiting outside. The emergency responders and investigators were also sat in the first several rows. The case had deeply affected and moved everybody. In November 2009, despite her lawyers pushing for her to get a lesser charge on the grounds of a troubled childhood and her age, the judge ruled that Elizabeth Bustamante would be tried as an adult and she was therefore indicted. She entered a plea of not guilty and trial preparation got underway. Just as Elizabeth's family and the prosecution thought they were finally getting somewhere, a huge blow came. In June 2011, her defense team requested that her lengthy confession to Sergeant Rice was thrown out. A judge ruled that because of her age and the line of questioning put forward by the juvenile officer working alongside Rice, at least part of her statement would not be admissible in court. After this, her trial was delayed and set for early 2012. The prosecution knew they were really up against it, and after going back and forth, thinking of the best approach, they decided to offer the option of a plea deal to Alyssa. Second-degree murder instead of first-degree murder. With this, Alyssa Bustamante withdrew her not guilty plea for first-degree murder and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder instead. This also spared her the chances of receiving the death penalty. The courtroom was packed. Everybody wanted to know what would happen. As part of the deal, Alyssa had to recount what had happened that day. As she went through what she had done in all its awful detail, reporters in the court said the tension was palpable, with everybody sitting in stunned silence. Her defense team also spoke and leaned heavily on her childhood and upbringing, mental health issues, and claiming that her prescribed medication made her more prone to violence. Despite all of this, Alyssa Bustamante was sentenced to life in prison for second-degree murder and 30 years for armed criminal action, and the sentences were to be served consecutively. Several months after she pleaded guilty, however, the United States Supreme Court ruled that juveniles cannot face automatic life sentences without the possibility of parole. So under Missouri's law, Alyssa may seek parole after 30 years. Patty gave a speech at her sentencing. She was so upset and physically shaking, the judge eventually asked her to stop talking. All Alyssa could say in response was, "I cannot even understand what you guys are going through," adding that she would give her life to bring Elizabeth back. A detective said it was in this moment Karen and Gary got up and walked out of the courtroom, and everybody could see Alyssa suddenly realize that the only 2 people that had stuck by her and tried to be a constant in her life had just walked away. Patty said that everything that came out of Alyssa's mouth was a lie. She had no remorse and she was being told what to say by her lawyers. The prosecutor, Mark Richardson, said he had never seen anything like this in his life and he hoped to never have to try a case like it again. The motive has to be the most senseless, reprehensible that could be in humankind, and that is to take a life for a thrill, he said. A forensic psychologist added it was clear from her patterns of behavior over the years, it was only a matter of time before she killed somebody. Went on to sue not only Alyssa, but the hospital where Alyssa sought treatment. She believes that the healthcare system should have seen the red flags and taken preventative measures. A judge threw out the lawsuit against the hospital, but the lawsuit against Alyssa was successful and she will ultimately owe Patty $5 million. Alyssa appealed her sentence in 2014, but this was denied. The events that transpired so very quickly on October 21, 2009 rocked the town and shattered the closeness of the community. Patty said she misses her daughter's kindness and her ability to see the good in everyone and everything. A friendly and innocent young girl, excited for her starring role in the school play, just playing with her friends and siblings, enjoying the simple pleasures that childhood brings. Her life was snatched away in the most frightening way imaginable, and the damage done to so many people on that day will forever be felt. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.